hyped as we are to get into this top 4 match. And I just have to mention again, you know, because both of these players are playing very, very unconventional teams or very interesting Pokemon here, I think it takes very experienced players to really make certain Pokemon work, and we will see here on Davide's side of the field Fluttermane, Orthworm, Chien-Pao, Gyarados, Tinglu, and Dragonite.
Of course, that Orthworm was piloted originally by David Katesh, that was kind of popularized it around European International Championships, doing very well. I believe top 16, if my memory serves me well here. Using that combination, just trying to get the Shed Tail into that Dragonite and using Bulldoze to make sure that Orthworm was staying nice and healthy. Of course, Dragonite with a substitute and multi-scale intact is a very difficult Pokemon to be taken down.
That fast.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, that's a very, very strong combination. But if that's not going to work, then you've got that Chien-Pao Dragonite combination that you can hit hard with right off the bat.
Played and tested. We know it works. And of course, Roberto here playing the Fluttermane, Breloom, Chien-Pao, Magnezone, Garchomp, and Talonflame. And I do want to mention here that Garchomp is one of those Pokemon that used to be very, very popular in earlier years, and now, you know, with the rise of such Pokemon as Great Tusk, haven't really seen it too much, but it is still a threat. You know, you do still need to respect it. It is also a Pokemon where I think if you're playing something like a Fluttermane, you do want it to outspeed something like a Garchomp. Otherwise, it could hit you back with very, very heavy hitting damage.
And of course, we see there the Chien-Pao with the Life Orb. When Roberto was on stream before, that Life Orb being able to knock out a Fluttermane in one hit because of that damage boost from the Life Orb made a real difference to the match that he played previously. We'll see if it makes a difference in this matchup. As you said before, we've got some unconventional picks, some different types of team compositions here. But if you're following along in chat, along with us, following live, do cast your votes right now. Davide on your left, Roberto on your right. Who are you supporting? Who do you think is going to make it all the way to the finals?
Man, I can see either of these players winning here. You know, they've made it this far for a reason. And now here in top 4, they're going to give it all they've got to make it into that final stage of the competition. So, you know, the Chien-Pao, as you've just mentioned, even though it is one of those more common picks, the Life Orb, an item that we haven't really seen a lot on that Pokemon specifically. But yeah, it has managed to get him all the way here to top 4, maybe knocking out a few more Fluttermanes on the way here with that Life Orb boost, of course. So yeah, really interesting to see here. Of course, Davide is playing a Fluttermane on his side himself.
Absolutely, and it is booster energy, so it's certainly one has the ability to get those protects out onto the field, but also, you know, it could be trained to be a little bit more defensively orientated, although Fluttermanes have been transitioning to more speedy, more aggressive versions of themselves rather than the bulkier ones that we saw a little bit earlier in the format. So again, you know, may come into play here, may not, we'll have to see. I think the one thing that will come into play, though, could be that Icy Wind from the Chien-Pao, which is something that we don't often see. Usually Chien-Pao opting for Sacred Sword in that move, but let's come back to that a little bit later as Talonflame, Magnezone leading out for Roberto. Gyarados and Tinglu, the choice for Davide going into this top 4 of the Turin special event.
Man, so we get to see the Magnezone right away, and this is a little bit of an interesting position here because that Magnezone is threatening that Gyarados with an electric type move right away, but the Tinglu, of course, on the other side is threatening the Magnezone with a ground type. But of course, there are a lot of options here for both players. Roberto could go for a Volt Switch into that Gyarados or go for a Terra Flying onto that Magnezone to make it immune to ground types. But of course, the Gyarados again could... it's not playing Protect.
It's not playing Protect.
It cannot protect itself against an incoming electric type here. So it is going to switch out here. Does not want to take a Thunderbolt or a Volt Switch. Going to bring in that Earthworm. So might see an Earthquake here from the Tinglu, but first a Will-O-Wisp from this Talonflame onto the Tinglu is going to lower its attack and have it take a little bit of damage every single turn. So no Tailwind yet, but we are going to see Volt Switch here from the Magnezone into that Earthworm slot. Going to do quite a lot of damage, actually.
I was going to say, it nearly did 50%, and actually with the citrus berry on that Orthworm could have been nicer for Davide if it was able to do just that little bit more damage, because then you'd end the turn with all of that health intact. Breloom, though, switching in favor of... Yes, it's on stream. We have it here right now, and that is a big Earthquake coming in from Davide's Ting Lu. Going to be healing up that Orthworm because of that Earth Eater ability, but not doing too much damage to the Breloom, but is going to break that Focus Sash.
Yeah, and the broken Focus Sash here could be huge a little bit later if that Dragonite comes in for a KO. So yeah, even though that Earthquake didn't really do a lot of damage, I think getting rid of that Focus Sash could definitely be worth it. But now that Breloom here in the field is threatening this Ting Lu with a Bullet Seed, or possibly even threatening this Orthworm with a Spore, although it does get access to Shed Tail. So, you know, depends who is faster here. But Gyarados switching in here for Davide, going to lower the attack of that Breloom and bring that Talonflame down to -2 attack already at this point. Of course, Talonflame, a little bit more supporter, so might not really care, is going to go for a Will-O-Wisp onto that Orthworm. So I'm curious to see here who is going to go first, the Breloom or the Orthworm. And are we going to see something like a Shed Tail? But no, it is the Bullet Seed from the Breloom into that Gyarados slot. Is going to do, depending on how many times it hits, it is going to hit 5 times, or up to 5 times, between 2 and 5 times.
Yeah, it's gonna hit quite a few times there and do quite a lot of damage to that. Gyarados, a critical hit on the final one, but not enough to pick up the knockout there. Orthworm going for that signature, well, not quite signature move, but a very rare move, Shed Tail. Going to be dropping its health down by 50%, switching, getting a substitute, and then switching out to its Pokemon in the back. And yeah, I'm looking for that Dragonite to be coming in and setting up in a prime position right now.
Yeah, this Dragonite coming in, going to get that substitute at full HP, meaning that, you know, you first have to break that substitute before you can even damage it or get something like a Will-O-Wisp off on it. And then, of course, you still need to break that multi-scale. So this Dragonite is not going down anytime soon. And of course, even if you do break that substitute and go for something like a Will-O-Wisp, it is carrying that Lumberry, so it will heal that off right away as well. So Gyarados in a really, really nice position here to go for some Dragon Dances and really boost that attack and speed stat.
Definitely is. Yeah, Roberto is definitely going to have to decide on how he's going to position in front of this Dragonite, because Davide's got no reason not to start boosting it up and not to now commit the Terra type onto this Dragonite. Use that Terra Blast to great effect. As Orthworm does rejoin the field, it's going to come back onto back instead of that Gyarados to preserve that Intimidate for later in the match. Tailwind coming out from the Talonflame is going to be boosting up the speed of both Talonflame and Breloom, but the Bullet Seed going into Orthworm doing a little bit less damage than it did to Gyarados.
Yeah, so that Tailwind on Talonflame from Talonflame will boost speed on Roberto's side of the field, which could help this Breloom get off some fast Spores. But the thing is here, you know, the Orthworm is already burned, and of course Dragonite does have the substitute up, so Spore, you know, might not be the correct option here. Dragon Dance here coming out though from the Dragonite is going to start boosting its attack and speed, and you know, the substitute is still there. It is still at full HP. It still has its Lumberry. Could go for another one.
Yeah, and you know, if it goes for another one, then it's kind of negating the Tailwind on Roberto's side of the field, maybe making it faster than that Breloom, or although depending on how this Dragonite is trained, it certainly could struggle to outspeed it even with a second Dragon Dance. I do like the Tailwind coming out from Roberto's side of the field, but that Dragonite being such a threat and continuing to boost up and put damage onto the field is going to make Roberto's job really quite difficult if he doesn't start actually getting some damage down onto that Dragonite substitute. Because that multi-scale is still in effect, it's going to be a tall order with what Roberto has currently, and it's definitely that Magnezone in the end game that's going to want to be putting that damage onto the Dragonite.
Yeah, and the Gyarados is going to come back out here for Davide, is going to fire off another Intimidate, meaning this Talonflame is now at -3, and this Breloom is at -2, so at some point even the substitute is going to become hard to break. Brave Bird going to go into that Dragonite. Is it going to break the substitute? No, it is not. At -3, barely doing any damage, but here a Mach Punch not going to be enough to get the KO on the Dragonite, as Dragonite just goes for another Dragon Dance, and it has still not lost its substitute or still not lost that long parry.
Nor any HP at the moment, showing why Shed Tail is such a powerful move in combination with that Dragonite. Davide really doing everything that he can to keep that substitute up on his Dragonite, making sure that those Brave Birds aren't really going to do too much damage whatsoever. And I feel like this is a matter of timing for Davide to really secure this match, because you want to be knocking out that Talonflame once the Tailwind expires. The Focus Sash on the Breloom is already broken, and so, you know, once the Tailwind leaves the field on Roberto's side, that Dragonite is going to be sitting there with all of the speed, all of the attack. You can't intimidate it, you can't burn it, you can't do too much damage to it. It's going to be...
Extremes are going to knock out the Breloom here in hit, you know, thanks to us Focus Sash being broken, being able to knock it out here. And yeah, as you just said, I think Davide does have to start going for some KOs here. Brave Bird here from the Talonflame is going to be not quite enough to break the substitute. Still hanging on. Those Intimidates really paying off. And the Waterfall from the Gyarados actually enough to knock out the Talonflame as well. So now a 4 Pokemon advantage for Davide's side. And this Dragonite still has not lost any HP. And it has 2 Dragon Dances set up. So Roberto now being able to bring in 2 new Pokemon that have not lost any stats yet. But it might just be too late already to come back from this.
It might indeed, and you know, with the last turn of Tailwind up on the field, we know that that Dragonite isn't able to protect itself from any damage, and maybe that means that the Chien-Pao is able to break the substitutes with an Icy Wind here. That would knock out the Dragonite at the same turn, and then it's all down to this Magnezone, whether it's able to get the one-hit KO onto this Dragonite. But I think Davide's played this very smartly, hasn't gone for the Terror just yet, because, hey, you don't need to, you've got 2 Dragon Dance's Extreme Speed is more than enough damage in most cases, and you also have access to that Earthquake as well, which is going to be able to do put a lot of pressure onto the Magnezone. So I really like the way that Davide has kept the Dragon typing, kept itself less weak to that Magnezone in the back.
Yeah, and of course, you know, Roberto does have to keep in mind here, this Chien-Pao is not carrying that Focus Sash that we usually see that was on the Breloom. So Chien-Pao is in a position to be knocked out by an Extreme Speed here if it does not go for a Protect. But Davide deciding to go for a Terra Flying does not want to be 4 times weak to any Ice moves here. So are we going to see a Protect from this Chien-Pao maybe? We are going to see a Terastization first for Roberto's side as well. Could be that Magnezone. Is that Magnezone going to turn into a flying type, going to make it immune to any possible ground type attacks coming out from this Dragonite, which is of course playing that Earthquake. And we do see, actually an Icy Wind from the Chien-Pao going to knock out that Gyarados, no problem whatsoever, and will be enough to break that substitute finally.
But that going for that Terra Flying is going to be a little bit of a downside potentially onto that because you're facing down that Magnezone, but we are going to see a Terra Blast coming out from Dragonite. It's going to be going into the Chien-Pao, going to be easily enough to pick up the knockout, but this Magnezone is waiting for its turn. Just going to be going for a powerful Flash Cannon into this Dragonite, but with that multi-scale,
any damage
not able to get the KO here, and Ting Lu coming into the field is definitely not what Roberto wants to be in front of in this position.
Yeah, Ting Lu here going to lower the special attack of this Magnezone. This Dragonite, of course, now that it has lost its Dragon type, is weak to any potential electric type attacks. But of course, you know, with those Dragon Dances and the attack boost is enough to just, actually does not get the KO on this Magnezone, thanks to that sturdy ability, thank you. But Magnezone, of course, locked into Flash Cannon now is not going to be enough to get the KO onto this Dragonite. So Magnezone goes down to a heavy slam here, and game 1 goes to Davide.
Absolutely fantastic play there for Davide, showing why Shed Tail is such a powerful, powerful move, and why Orthworm deserves to be respected in the VGC Regulation Set C format. Something that we didn't mention in that end game situation, we were talking, I was talking about the Thunderbolt coming out from the Magnezone, but the Flash Cannon was definitely the correct option to be locking into because that Ting Lu is a ground type in the back.
Yeah, of course. If Magnezone had locked into a Thunderbolt there, would not have been able to damage the Ting Lu at all anymore, since it is locked into that move because of the choice specs, and Roberto not having any more Pokemon to switch into means that Magnezone is going to be stuck using that move. So yeah, Davide really forcing Roberto into a little bit of a corner, and that Dragonite, you know, just being able to stay behind that substitute for so long, you know, thanks to that Earthworm passing on with that Shed Tail, just being able to get up 2 Dragon Dances and then kind of starting to sweep through Roberto's team. Roberto's going to have to be really careful in Game 2 to not let that happen again.
Careful is an understatement there going into this Game 2. And looking at Roberto's team, I'm looking at the way that you play the Magnezone in this particular game. We saw the Volt Switch going out into the Earthworm doing around 50%, just a little bit less, not activating the Citrus Berry at the very least. And I wouldn't mind seeing that Magnezone actually stick around in the early game a little bit more rather than go for the Volt Switch out. Maybe you have to commit your Terra a little bit earlier in the game if you do that, just to protect it from any ground moves on Davide's side of the field. But I feel like making sure that that Earthworm doesn't get its Shed Tail off could be a path to victory for Roberto.
Yeah, but also, you know, if that Magnezone had been in a little bit earlier with that Tailwind support instead of that -2 Breloom and -3 Talonflame, could have maybe worked it a little bit differently. But we are going to get straight into Game 2, and it is going to be Breloom Magnezone lead here for Roberto versus Ting-Lu Earthworm.
And a really difficult situation for Davide to navigate right off the bat. It's that Gyarados in the back that has the safety goggles. But if you switch in the Gyarados, you've got to make sure that you're switching into the right slot, because you could just get a Volt Switch right in there, and there's an opportunity. Maybe a little bit presumptuous, but you could Volt Switch into that Ting-Lu. It would be very dangerous to do, but it would look super cool if that Gyarados switched into that slot.
Yeah, you know, this Earthworm is not playing Protect here, so Magnezone free to go for an attack into that slot. And, you know, since the Breloom is faster than that Earthworm, it can easily put it to sleep with a Spore before it can even go for a Shed Tail, which is exactly what it is going to do. Breloom being the fastest Pokemon on the field here. Earthworm going to be put to sleep here for at least 1 turn. Volt Switch coming out into that same slot, going to do about just a little under 50% and going to switch out into a different Pokemon. So we're going to have to wait and see what comes in here on Roberto's side. But of course, Ting-Lu still hasn't used its move.
Certainly hasn't. I really love the way that Roberto played that turn, knowing, as you said, like the Earthworm doesn't have the ability to protect itself. You know that you can Spore into that slot, and if the Gyarados does switch in to block the Spore with its safety goggles, you know you get some value out of the Volt Switch. And Ting-Lu's not really the most threatening Pokemon for either Breloom or the Talonflame that's now switched out, as the Earthquake comes out. Will be breaking that Focus Sash on the Breloom, but now that the Earthworm is asleep, there's no Shed Tail, and that Dragonite is not going to be feeling quite as strong in the endgame unless this Earthworm is able to wake up very soon.
Yeah, but something Roberto does have to keep in mind now. I mean, he is in a position to just go for another Spore here into that Ting-Lu slot, but the Earthworm being slower than that Breloom means that it has already taken its turn 1 sleep. So it could potentially just wake up here and still go for that Shed Tail and switch back into that Dragonite, and we may have a repeat of Game 1.
I think you've got to definitely play proactively if that's what Roberto is fearing here, because yeah, the Will-O-Wisp going out onto that Ting-Lu will still allow it to heal up that Earthworm with an Earthquake this turn, and that's really what this game is all about for Davide. The Bullet Seed though coming out, starting out with a critical hit.
Damage. And now the question is, of course, how many times will this Bullet Seed hit? It has already hit 3 times, and that's it. That Ting-Lu's still staying on the field here. Earthquake gonna go and heal this Earthworm just a little bit. Not gonna do any damage to this Talonflame, and just chip down that Breloom a little bit more.
But this Earthworm is getting ever closer to waking up this turn, and it does indeed do that, getting the Shed Tail, going down to half of its hit points, activating that Citrus Berry. This is peak Earthworm action going on right here as the substitute gets set up, gets switched out to Dragonite, and it's going to be the Dragonite on the field against the 2 Pokemon that really struggle to be able to knock out that substitute.
Yeah, and a little bit of a familiar situation here from Game 1. Dragonite now behind that substitute, and of course the Ting-Lu here surviving that burn, but can easily switch into the Gyarados Gyarados here and fire off some Intimidates onto both of these physical attacking Pokemon. And there's nothing really stopping this Dragonite here for going for some more Dragon Dances, because, you know, this Breloom is not going to finish off the substitute, and obviously Talonflame cannot go for a Will-O-Wisp into that substitute slot. So another very awkward position here for Roberto.
I think the one advantage that Roberto has in this position that he didn't have in the previous game was the amount of Intimidates out on the field onto this Breloom and the Talonflame. Now, I'm not saying Brave Bird's going to knock out this substitute in one with that multi-scale in play, but certainly a couple of them would be more likely to be able to knock it out. And if that Chien-Pao reaches onto the field in Tailwind a little bit later when the substitute breaks, there might be a little bit of an opportunity for Roberto to be able to knock out this Dragonite.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. You know, Brave Bird going to come into this substitute here, and I'm curious to see, is it enough to get the... Oh, no, it does not knock out the substitute. Never mind. Mach Punch going into that slot. That was the Tinglu, just trying to get that knockout, but does not get it. And Dragonite, of course, going to start setting up some Dragon Dances.
we're getting the Dragonite going a little bit faster, and actually again, another little difference here is that once that Dragonite has boosted its speed, depending on how it's trained, possibly could be faster than the Talonflame with a Terra Blast, but doesn't even need to do that with the extreme speed. Actually thinking about it slightly differently. So no Tailwind getting set up on Roberto's side of the field, not going to have the speed advantage if the Talonflame gets knocked out this turn, and the Gyarados is pretty happy to sit in front of the Breloom.
Yeah, we have seen a lot of very bulky Dragonites that were more on the slower end. So maybe with one Dragon Dance, if this Dragonite is a little bit faster, could outspeed this Talonflame. Breloom, though, going to switch out here for Roberto, going to bring in that Magnezone. So maybe with another Brave Bird, could knock out that substitute, but actually Dragonite going to go for a Terrestrialization here into that Flying type. So might just fire off a Terra Blast into this Talonflame instead.
Or potentially this Magnezone on the switch-in. It would be quite nice for Davide to remove that Breloom from the field, and maybe why Roberto predicting and going for a switch-in with the Magnezone. But it's going to be a Terra Blast. It is going to outspeed that that Talonflame. Now that the Gale Wings is no longer in play, it's going to be a one-hit knockout, certainly with that attack boost. No surprises there. And it's going to be a follow-up here from the Gyarados. Just a Waterfall doing a little bit of damage, and if that Magnezone goes for a Terra Flying, we know it's probably now in range of another Terra Blast.
Yeah, not only just another Terra Blast, but you know, it is obviously in range here of an Earthquake from the Dragonite, so it might have to consider going for a Terrestrialization here. But, you know, then again, the Terrestrialization is something that is to be expected here, so Dragonite could just go for another Terra Blast into that slot, especially now that the Chien-Pao is on the field. You have to remember, it does not only drop the defenses on Davide's side of the field, but also the defenses of that Magnezone.
Absolutely, and that could play a big part in whether or not this Magnezone gets KO'd. There's a little bit of a prediction going on as to which Pokemon on Roberto's side of the field does he Terrastallize. If he Terrastalizes at all, I'm wondering whether the Chien-Pao will be knocked out by an extreme speed, though, with the Dragonite at 1+, and certainly not this turn with a Protect coming out from that Chien-Pao.
Does not want to take an extreme speed here from this Dragonite that is still behind the substitute, but Dragonite actually going to go for a Terra Blast into that Magnezone slot, which did not go for a Terrestrialization here, so it is not going to knock it out since it does still resist it thanks to its Steel and Electric type, but Waterfall here is going to be enough to knock out this Magnezone. So Davide calling that Protect correctly, or maybe just not caring, knowing that he still has that substitute. He is safe behind that, behind that sub, and now another very uncomfortable position here for Roberto. Breloom coming in is weak to that Terra Blast, and Chien-Pao might be in extreme speed range.
It might be, and that sort of Ruin ability coming back to bite Roberto there a little bit. I don't think that Waterfall would have knocked out the Magnezone without it. It may have been a little bit on the edge. We won't know now. All we know is that that sort of Ruin did push it over the edge there, and yeah, that's one of the difficulties of using Chien-Pao, and certainly when your opponent takes advantage of it like that is very exciting to see. But we're going to see a Terra coming out from Roberto's side of the field. It is going to be that Chien-Pao going for its Terra Ice, boosting up the power of its Ice-type moves, and maybe with a combination of Mach Punch to break the substitute,
Possibly.
potentially?
I'm not sure, man. I'm really not sure. No, it is not enough to get here on that Dragonite. And Dragonite actually going to be faster than that Qian Power thanks to the Dragon Dance speed boost. Going to go for a Terra Blast into that Qian Power slot, which just Restless gets the one-hit knockout onto that Qian Power. And it is looking dire for Roberto here.
Only the Breloom in front of two Pokemon that have flying in their types. Waterfall following up onto the Gyarados is going to do a little bit of damage, but I think the writing is on the wall here for Davide, and he is going to be going into the finals of the Turin special event. Congratulations there. A massive comeback. After a couple of years, he is back with a vengeance.
No, that was so well played from Davide's side. Just that whole, the Earthworm getting off that Shed Tail into that Dragonite slot, and Roberto not really being able to do anything about it. And of course, may have gotten a little bit lucky with that first turn wake up on the sleep, but that's the thing with moves like Spore. If you do put enemy Pokemon to sleep, you always have to, kind of deal with the fact that you have to expect every Pokemon to wake up on that first turn and kind of cover for that. But maybe Roberto not really seeing another out there and hoping that Earthworm would stay asleep for just one more turn. But
yeah, I think you've definitely got to take advantage of the particularly poor matchup there for Roberto. He did pretty much everything he could to, claw back those games, and certainly how Roberto adjusted in Game 2 was very good with getting the Earthworm asleep. And hey, the Earthworm did wake up pretty quickly. That's how it goes sometimes. But I think from Roberto's position, with the strength of Davide's team, the way that he piloted it, and of course, the strength of a team like that is that if your opponent doesn't really have a matchup for you, it's very difficult for you to be in a bad spot at any point.
Yeah, and that Dragonite really, that substitute tanking so many hits from so many Pokemon. But I also have to take note to how speedy this Dragonite was compared to a lot of other ones that we've seen during this tournament. Being able to outspeed a Qian Power after just one Dragon Dance. If you go for the more bulkier version of Dragonite, you might not necessarily expect that, seeing as Qian Power is one of the fastest Pokemon in the format.
It is, and yeah, you're absolutely right. The Dragonite doesn't really need quite as much defensive investment when you're training it up, because it's got that substitute coming in from the Earthworm and the multiscale, which makes it, the substitute makes that multiscale much more difficult to break. And so, yeah, you've got a little bit more flexibility there if you're playing Davide's team to use all of the speed training to your advantage to get that Dragon Dance up, but also use that speed and that power of the Terran flying next to the Qian Pao if you can't use that Earthworm mode.
Yeah, and just this Dragonite hiding behind the substitute, never lose, and also having that Lumberry and that multi-scale, and with the Gyarados support, constantly switching in and out, cycling those Intimidates to really lower the attack on the Breloom and the Talonflame, just, really not letting his opponent breaking even his substitute, because we did see, Roberto is playing both that Spore and the Will-O-Wisp, so wasn't even really given the chance to use any of those moves. And even if the substitute had gone down, the Lumberry will heal the first burn or sleep that is inflicted onto that Dragonite. So yeah, really tanky Dragonite there, although it may have been invested more in speed.
I think you hit on a really good point there, that the Dragonite in many respects was just difficult in all which ways to be able to knock out. I mean, there was that Life Orb on the Qian Pao that would have been able to do a lot of damage, but the way that Davide played it, with making sure that it always came in with a substitute free and hitting the Shed Tail button when there was a Talonflame and Breloom on the field, really made it so that there wasn't many opportunities for Roberto to come back. And, using that Dragonite so well behind the substitute, taking advantage of the extra space he had to get Dragon Dances up when he could, just put too much pressure on the field for Roberto to come back from.
Yeah, and I also have to mention that, you know, the Breloom, it was carrying that focus sash, of course, but never really got it to activate there since, you know, Davide also did a really great job of always breaking that. You know, the Tinglu, despite being burned and not really doing that much damage, still staying on the field and going for Earthquakes to keep that Earthworm healthy.
Yeah.
And just dishing out that little bit of damage onto Breloom that, you know, turned out to be very valuable. And in this case, you know, maybe a focus sash on the Chien Pao to keep it alive would have helped. But, you know, the Life Orb on Chien Pao, it's gotten Roberto this far in the tournament. You know, top 4 still a very, very impressive accomplishment. Yeah, but I am being told that we are ready for an interview with our first finalist.
Thank you so much, Ben and Shauna. I am here with our top 4 winner, our first finalist, David Cognetta. Congratulations, David. Amazing match. You, again, I think, were going up against a pretty scary team in Team Preview, and you overcame it perfectly.
Yeah, the main issues, I think, was Breloom.
Yeah.
The Spore on the Autumn, we saw it, and the game 2 could have been very troublesome. But I get the 1 turn wake up, so we take it. Also the Chien Pao Life Orb with the Terror Eyes was very menacing. But in the end, Dragonite did more than I could have ever asked for.
Yeah, that setup when you, I mean, first of all, before we get into the match, how are you feeling now you're back in a final? You know, you're very well established, very successful Italian player from previous formats, previous years, and to be back in a final again, it must be really exciting.
Yeah, it's nice. I hope to not lose the finals again, but let's see.
You're playing so well, but getting back into the match, like you say, the Dragonite, once you got that setup with the Earthworm, you got that Shed Tail off and then the Dragonite in behind the substitute, it just felt invincible, especially the way that you were using the Gyarados to kind of support with the Intimidate as well.
Yeah, Dragonite with the substitute from Earthworm is almost impossible to one-hit kill. It's possible to one-hit kill it, and with multi-scale, you can also make the substitute much more bulkier, and you saw it in the streamed match.
Yeah.
He tanked like 2 Brave Bird, where 2 Brave Bird and 1 Mach Punch.
Yeah,
I went for
standing strong.
double Dragon Dance and swept the opponent's team.
Yeah, I think at that point you thought that Roberto really didn't have a way to come back, because breaking the substitutes so late on in that game, Dragonite was set up, you'd done perfectly to get it into that position right there in that match, and then it was just, okay, well, how can you deal with that Dragonite? And I think the thing for Roberto, he did adjust his game plan going into game 2 slightly and kind of targeted that Earthworm early on by sporing it. But then you got the 1-turn wake up, which was really great for you, because then it meant you were in that exact same position again with the Dragonite once again, and it all started all over again. Yeah,
once you set up the Dragonite with the substitute against Roberto team, I think you have like won 90%.
Yeah. And the Tinglu, I think the Tinglu is a bit of an unspoken hero in that match, because the Earthworm did take quite a bit of damage there. I love the item choice on the Earthworm to make sure that it is staying on the field so you can utilize that Shed Tail. But the Earthquake, constant Earthquake's not really doing too much offensive damage to anything on Roberto's side of the field, but the main thing that it did was just to keep that Earthworm healthy with that Earth Eater ability.
Yeah, I didn't care about Tinglu doing damage. All I needed to do was to break Breloom Sash, maybe Talonflame ability with Ruination. I didn't care about the Will-O-Wisp, since the main goal of Tinglu was to drop the special attack from Manizon, and also giving Earthworm enough HP to set up a substitute for Dragonite, which was the real weak condition.
Yeah, and I think the coverage options, the move choices in particular that you had on Dragonite are very unique. You don't normally see a set like you've got, but I think it covered the threat of that Magnezone perfectly. You had the Earthquake in case it didn't terrestrialize, and then you had that Terra Flying as well. So if it did terrestrialize, you still had a really strong way to hit it after setting up.
Yeah, with Earthquake, which also sort room gain HP, Roberto was kind of forced to Terra Magnezone. Since if you don't Terra Magnezone, then I can just spam Earthquake against all of this team, and with the 4-time weaknesses from Magnezone, like, you don't want to take it.
No, definitely not. And then you're in a position as well, if that Orthworm's healthy, to set up another Shed Tail for something else as well, so it's perfect. David, thank you so much. I'm going to let you go and take a little moment before the final, get yourself together, thoughts together, and get prepared. I just want to congratulate you once again.
Thank you again.
Good luck in the final. Thank you for taking the time to come share your thoughts with us, and we'll throw it to a quick break, and then we'll be right back with our next top 4 game.